Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm talking with Christa Ovenell of death-preparedness.ca. She is a funeral director and an end of life doula, and we have a fantastic conversation about bringing together the head and the heart as we do our end of life planning and disposition planning. And I think you're really going to enjoy this one. So stay tuned for it. Make sure you've subscribed to this channel using the button down below, and also subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. You can go to eoluniversity.com/support if you'd like to make a small contribution that will help keep this channel and the podcast on the air. And I appreciate it so much in advance if you choose to do that. It makes a big difference. So we'll move on with my conversation with Christa Ovenell. Today, I'm so happy to welcome my guest, Christa Ovenell. Christa is a licensed funeral director and end-of-life doula and the founder of Death's Apprentice Education and Planning. She helps folks think about, talk about, and prepare for all aspects of life, even death. And you can find her on her website, deathsapprentice.ca, or on Instagram at the same address, deathsapprentice.ca. So Christa, welcome and thanks for joining me here today.
Oh, Karen, I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really interested in starting off by hearing your story because I don't very often meet funeral directors who are also death doulas. That seems very unique to me, and I'm curious how
It
you
is
got to that
unique.
place.
And and I wish that I could sort of single-handedly change this. So I love the chance to tell this story. Um, First of all, I think there's honestly in the low tens of funeral directors and end-of-life doulas that are in anywhere in North America. And this is ridiculous to me. It's absolutely ridiculous, and we can talk about why that has sort of set up in these camps later. But how I got here was that I was in uh, kind of I guess the technical term would be a soul destroying job in corporate education before I finally really just looked inside. I had been thinking for decades, probably close to 20 years, about making a transition into death caring and specifically into funeral directing. And every time I looked at how to become a funeral director, it was like, quit your really fancy job with your corner office and your staff and your huge paycheck and go and become an apprentice for 2 years while you concurrently go to school at a community college, essentially. And I was kind of at the top of my game in my previous role in, as I say, education, and I was like, I can't do that. But I kept going back to it, and I kept being pulled into this idea that I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And the other thing that was really stopping me was that my, at the time, 80-year-old mother, well, she has strong opinions, shall we say. And I was terrified about what her opinion would be of me leaving this really fancy, again, high paying, highly secure, very prestigious position at a large institution and becoming a funeral director. And so I could never sort of pull the trigger on it. And then I hit a certain part in my kind of a point in my career where I thought, okay, I can be that person who says, armchair quarterback, I would have made a great funeral director. I would have been great at this thing that I always said I wanted to do. Or I can just find out. And I went to my mom, who at the time lived independently, very opinionated, as I said. And I said, Mom, I have something to tell you. And I think I made it sound so serious that she was probably relieved when I told her what it actually was. She said, What is it, my dear? And I said, Well, I'm leaving my job. And she was instantly worried. And I said, But I have this plan in place and I want to become a funeral director. And she looked at me really hard, and then she took my hands and she said, Oh, my darling, I couldn't think of anyone better. And it
Oh,
just, it's a story that I tell not infrequently because I think there are so many of us who hold back from things because of something that we've told ourselves about what other people will think. And, first of all, yeah, we shouldn't be held back because of what other people, but we do, we are. And that's just the reality. And the other reality is that it does matter what other people think, no matter how much we try and tell ourselves it doesn't. And you might be wrong about what they're going to think. And if you take that brave step, you might be very, very surprised by the support and the love and the connection you get. And if my mother had gone the other way, you know what? The bravery in that step, I was prepared for her to go the other way. So there was no negative
Mm.
outcome.
Yeah, so true. So
So true.
true.
So I did this. I quit this very high paying job and took an apprenticeship at a large corporate funeral home, and I went back to school. And I had been in education for a long time, so it was an interesting step to go from being in educational settings to now being a student in this weird sort of small thing. It was a very strange experience, I have to say. And I did it with the sole intention, frankly, of messing with all of it. I really didn't want to be a funeral director just to be a funeral director. Incredibly important work. And hey, anybody who wants to know what it takes to come into this business, please reach out. But I didn't want I didn't want to just day in and day out go and sit down and do that. I wanted to change the way we think about, talk about, plan, prepare for this life's only certainty, right? And so I waited until I was nearly finished. I took a course at another local college that was a end of life doula course. I feel very strongly, unlike being a funeral director and embalmer, that's a licensed trade or a licensed profession, and and it's externally licensed. So there are certain things that you have to do in a certain order, and there are certain certifications that need to be met. The same is not true for being an end of life doula, and that doesn't make it any less valuable or any less rich. But there is no one course that you can take. Whereas in the province that I live up here in Canada, there's one class, one course, one apprenticeship that you need to do to become a funeral director. Waited till I was almost done that, took this course, did a bunch of other learning, spent a lot of time in deep reflection, and became, I'm continuing to become a doula as well. And I think it really allows for an opportunity um, to offer better service. Funeral directors don't typically meet a family until after something has occurred. If doulas and funeral directors work together, or if they are one person holding those two roles, they can actually guide through what is a very complex and often difficult time with much more serenity and peace.
Mm. That's such a great story, in on so many ways. I was thinking of how when the call comes, it doesn't go away.
Yes.
The calling will be there. You can say no as many times as you want, but
As
it will
20
be
years if you want to.
coming
Yeah.
back to you. And then also that you kind of knew you were going into this field to shake it up a little bit, to do things differently. I really like that, that somehow in your heart you knew that's what was needed. And
Yes.
and then also like I've been talking so much lately about collaboration, and we need to
Yes.
bring different groups together, and you are the embodiment of a collaboration in
This is
your
it.
your training in two different areas and bringing that together, and just how powerful it is, how how much greater you are as a funeral director and as an end of life doula because you have
Yes.
training in both.
Yes. No, thank you for seeing that. That is exactly it. And this idea, it's challenging to sort of typical or corporate funeral homes because I think they see doulas as a threat to what they're trying to do. And it's the exact opposite, actually. Education and demystifying this process is in fact going to empower a consumer, absolutely. But an empowered consumer is one who has a trusting relationship with the brand that they're connecting to, and therefore they will be loyal.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of ways to make this a positive thing instead of being really worried and putting down the curtain, and coming at it from a fear-based perspective.
That's so true. And I was thinking of some of my loved ones, my mom in particular. She did a, is it called a pre-need or
Oh,
pre-planning
yes.
for her funeral?
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, it was great in that they helped her make a lot of decisions early on, but no one who helped her with that had any understanding of what might happen before she died. The
No.
talk was only about after you're already gone, here's what we will do. And to think about being able to incorporate someone who could talk about the entire process and what other choices she
Imagine
might have to make.
Imagine if you could offer holistic advanced care planning and include, okay, now here are the things you want to think about for your funeral choices and options, for your disposition choices and options. And instead, again, what ends up happening is you hire this group of folks who are commissioned salespeople essentially to try and sell the biggest package they can. Is that truly service? No.
And that it seems to me, I was thinking about how in medicine, so often I got to see the outcome when people don't plan ahead, have
Yeah.
zero plans for their end of life and what they might want in terms of medical care. But I'm sure that's equally true in terms of funerals and disposition when people have never thought about it or planned for it, that
And
you've
the
probably seen.
destruction that the
Yeah.
weight that causes, adult children of parents who have never had this conversation, it's like the stresses and tensions and difficulties in any family, they become almost weaponized in these circumstances. And if we can just find ways societally, culturally, individually as well to incorporate a conversation about these inevitabilities that is factual, but head and heart is something I often say. We need to marry the head and the heart. And that's what, and really being a funeral director who's literally going to fill out the paperwork, and being a doula who is going to educate and inform and collaborate with and guide and listen and be there during periods of transition, including a final transition. That's what that's all about.
Yeah, so true. And as I've seen in medicine, people who don't have a plan and haven't thought about it oftentimes end up with far more medical care and treatment than they actually wanted at a great expense. And I'm sure the same is true with funerals. If people haven't planned, they may get something they didn't really want.
They didn't really want, and sometimes, the people, because remember, you'll be dead, right? So somebody is making these choices for you afterwards. And, if they have no clue as to what you might have wanted, they will either overcompensate or undercompensate, and they will almost always feel anxiety, guilt, um, and enormous stress.
Yeah.
And all of that can sometimes lead to getting out your checkbook, and doing things that you're not really very connected to, or you don't really want, but you're just not sure. Okay, I guess we need that.
Yeah, and I can imagine people have a fear if I say I don't want to spend a lot of money on my loved one around their funeral and disposition. Does that mean I don't love them enough? Like if I love them more, would I be willing to lay out a lot more money for an elaborate funeral? And those two things really are not connected.
They're not connected. No.
Yeah. So it makes sense to me. The more planning we can do, the better off we are. But because our dying and our after death experience are so connected and interwoven, to have someone like you who helps with that entire scenario, I mean, the entire process, it's just amazing. And so I was so excited to talk to you just after hearing how you do this work that you do.
Well, thank you. I was super excited to talk to you. So, mutual fan club.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if you have some tips for people who are beginning to start their planning. And I'm partly personally interested in that because I'm trying to look ahead at my own planning and it can be overwhelming at times. Like
Yeah.
there's just so many things to think about. And so I'm curious to know how you might guide someone who's beginning the process who doesn't feel really close to it yet, who's
Absolutely.
healthy.
And often healthy, but maybe everything is sort of going very, very well right now. I've got plenty of time to think about this. No, you don't. So I do have some tips. And one of the I guess sort of a foundational program that I do, it's called Prep School, and it's what I call holistic advanced care planning. And you see actually over there in the logo, you see this check mark. I actually put that in my sort of visual representation as a nod to the fact that there is no checklist anywhere that anyone can give you to get ready for this work. And unfortunately, because we are so distanced from end of life and death and dying, and because we know so little, that's almost always the first question I get. Do you have a checklist that I could use? And I'm just like, and you know what? I was sort of defeated after a couple of years of saying no. I was like, yeah, sure I do. Here you go. And I trick people into this checklist because it's not a checklist at all. But there are four elements to it. And the elements are that we really need to look at our legal and like legal, administrative, and financial decisions that need to be made. Okay, the documentation there is really important. And we need to look at medical and philosophical decision making, right?
Mhm.
That's sort of the second pillar. The third check or the third box that we need to tick is we need to think about disposition and ceremony. So funerals, right? But funerals are kind of the new F word. And so often I kind of shy away from that word. I personally think we should just re-embrace it and call any after death gathering a funeral. And that's what I do personally. And I think funerals are so important, but a lot of people are like, I don't want a funeral. But when you ask, would you allow people to gather and talk about you afterwards if it brought them peace and comfort? They're like, oh, heck yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's a funeral. So, but funerals and the ceremony element are truly only just one part of that equation. Disposition, burial, cremation, aquamation, terramation, Viking burials, like which aren't really a thing. The disposition is an important thing that a lot of people don't know anything about
Mhm.
either. So disposition and ceremony, sort of the third pillar. And then lastly, what I call the emotional heirlooms. So the legacy pieces. These are four things. And the reason that planning that you typically feel overwhelmed by this is that people are trying to tell you that you need to do this as if it were a checklist, and it's not. It's actually all interconnected. Even legal and administrative and financial documentation, right? Well, actually, that just goes like this, hand in hand with medical and philosophical decision making. If you name whatever you call it where you live, up here, it's a representation agreement, section 9. This is the document that gives someone the essentially the medical power of attorney, right? And this is
Mhm.
often a word that in many states that's what it's called. This document really just names someone who can speak on your behalf. But if you don't tell them what to say or how you feel, what your beliefs and values are around certain important and unknowable questions that may or may not occur in the future, then you're not doing the job right. So we have to stop looking at this as a checklist, and we have to start looking at it as this beautiful, holistic, whole thing that we can begin and work on and move through and return to and complete in various ways and return to and return to and return to. It's not
Mm.
really a one and done thing because you, Karen, right now, relatively healthy, feeling on top of the world, great, no immediate illnesses that are taking up your mind or anything like that, no diagnoses. Well, in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, is that the same Karen? No. Karen's going to have different things that are occurring. So That's my advice is don't try and approach this as a checklist. Approach it as something that is guided and structured, but that will allow you to blend into these different pillars. And something is better than nothing. So
Mm,
getting it done to a point of good enough and then closing it off, revisiting it, coming back to it. This is what you're going to need to get through it. Because even those amongst us who have, like, y'all know, y'all have one of those friends that has their binder,
mhm, mhm,
even that person, has not thought of everything. And even that person, smug as they might be, there's more work that they can do. So just do it to the best of your ability, move through it and revisit it when the time comes.
mhm. That's such good advice. And I really like that idea that you kind of keep spiraling through the
Yeah.
work as you grow and change and things in your life change. Because sometimes that's what I get hung up on, the but what if
Oh,
questions, because I can think of one thing. I would like this to be like this, but what if this happens? What if that happens? What about this?
and so what does
And
it do? It stops you from doing anything.
exactly. Exactly. Like, well, I just need to wait until everything happens and then I'll make a decision based on what's
Sure.
happened. But I realized no, that's not how it should work. But I love this idea that it's kind of like really all of the growth that we're doing in our lives and the new things that we're learning. We just weave it into who we are. It keeps transforming, it keeps growing, we keep working on it over time. And so the idea of getting it out of the checklist
Mhm.
format and not thinking of it that way is, I'll spend 2 days working on this and I'll be done with it forever. But I'll always be thinking about this.
I'll
I'll
be
always
thinking about
be
this. I
looking
might
at it.
update as you see something, as something happens to a friend or a family member. You might be like, huh, okay, I might want to rethink that because the actual legal documentation, that doesn't take very long at all. It really doesn't. And you can, especially now with like online platforms and things like that, you can always even make your own revisions for goodness sakes. So that's not the hard part. It's the soul part. That's the heart work is the hard work, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And
Mm.
what's true is that things around us, options and opportunities are changing all the time too. Like
Absolutely.
10 years ago, I would have thought I'll just be cremated, but I didn't know back then about things like aquamation and terramation. There are more and more options all the time for disposition. So I want to keep
That's right.
changing my ideas as I go and learn
You
about new.
may, and actually, I get that question a lot from people who want to make sure that they've put things in place so that their kids aren't left with a mess, and they want to, like your mom did, have a pre-need and whatnot. And I say, you know what, do it. Well, now, and I will say, depending on where people are listening from, this could be different. But where I am, the vast majority of our pre-needs are written as what is essentially insurance. So you will never lose this money. It will, if you change your mind and at the very end of the day you're like, oh, or you move from one province to another province, that's okay. It doesn't have to be redeemed, if you will, at the funeral home that you originally created it with. And you're never at any risk of losing that investment. If you decide to change things, there are ways that you could, for example, have the value paid out to the estate, and then you could use that money in the estate to pay for the new idea.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you've still paid for it. You've still collected interest on it hopefully for all of these years, and then at the end, you've got this lump of money. Oh, mom, really, cremation, not for her. Aquamation is for her. And she's moved 3 states over. No problem. We'll have it paid to the estate and we'll do this thing that we know she wanted because she was brave enough to revisit her ideas.
Hmm. That's so perfect. This is really inspiring to me.
Good, good.
But yeah, so many things are coming to my mind. But I was thinking, when my mom died, if she had not done the pre-need and really stated her wishes for a funeral, my brother and I are very different people with a different relationship with her. Neither one of us would have really known what she wanted. We each would have had our own ideas of what would be a good funeral for her, and we never would have been able to agree on
And it was
anything.
like in one of the hardest sort of periods of your life, you were given this guidebook that you knew, and you didn't have to have any guilt over, and you
Yes.
didn't have to have any second guessing, because there it is in her writing with her signature at the bottom. I truly think it's one of the biggest gifts. My grandmother back in 1995 died. She was 95 years old. She died, and my mother, so her daughter, my mother, returned home. We all returned home from her service, and Mom was so moved by the fact that Granny had pre-needed. And all of this stuff that was hard for Mom to deal with wasn't hard at all because Granny had pre-needed. She went off, she marched into like the cheapest place on the block, because my mom's Ukrainian. And she signed this paperwork, and she paid for it over 2 years, I think. It was adorable. And my mom, what is it, 2024? My mom is still alive,
Mm.
and the poor funeral home that's going to have to redeem this when the time comes, because they are not going to make money on this. And it is secured in these 1995, right? But
Yeah.
I'm going to redeem it in 2024 or 2025, or God knows, maybe 2026. And it's all going to be done and dealt with. And even now, my mom, in her more advanced dementia, even now, she occasionally says things like, "Oh, I've taken care of that for you, dear." And it's
Mm.
just, she knows it's a gift too, because it was a gift to
It's,
her.
it's huge. It's huge. That's really wonderful. And then I wanted to just come back to one more thing you
Sure.
said about the word funeral itself and how that word carries a lot of baggage with it, I think. And I see so many people who have a totally negative reaction to the idea of funeral, but I think it's all based on some past experience they had that maybe was gloomy or sad or somehow frightening to them. And that's what they see, how they see a funeral, not as all the possibilities for what it could be.
For what it could be. And, I think that, so I'm a funeral director, and I still think it's the funeral director's fault that the general public has this negative association with the word funeral, because about 150 years ago, as people stopped dying in the home, and sort of around 100, 150 years ago, people stopped dying in the home, and we began to see the beginning of the medicalization of the dying process itself. This is the same time that funeral homes came into existence, and we we kind of removed the innate knowledge that all of us, and most of us women, would have carried as the carers for the dying and the carers of the dead. Sure, the men will go and dig the holes and carry the body. That's heavy work for sure. But we pulled people out of home, and we kind of hid death away. And then at the same time, we had these very nice people who opened up these funeral homes. They were going to take the heavy work out of our hands and going to make it all much better for us. But it became a prescriptive thing instead of an innate and truly personal thing that we all knew how to do. And now, I'll tell you, I don't work day to day in a funeral home anymore. All of my work is education and public facing now, but I am still a funeral director. But when I was a day to day, every day in the funeral home funeral director, the phone would ring, I would answer, "Hello, so and so funeral home." And the first thing that people would say was, "Hi, my blank has died." Let's say my mom has died. "I don't know what to do now," was a statement. And the question was, "What do I do now?" Those were the two most common sentences slash questions that I ever received. And 100, 150 years ago, nobody said that. We all
Mhm.
knew what happened as you were dying, and we knew what happened when you died. We knew who to call. We knew what the process was. We understood it. And that was essentially taken from us. And this is why modern funeral directors like me and community death caring partners like doulas, they want to kind of repossess this knowledge and remind everyone that we do have this knowledge. Sure, there's a bit of paperwork that needs to get done, and a funeral director helping with that at a really chaotic time is a wonderful thing. I'm very pro funeral director, but but we need to be empowering our communities to understand what this is, so that their question isn't, "I don't know what this is. I don't know what to do." so that they can actually walk in and say, I know exactly what to do. And I welcome your help during this difficult time. That's the future of funeral practice. And the
Mm.
reason that people are so averse to funerals, capital F, the new F word funeral, is because we have been told what to do. And we have been told where to stand and what to do and what to say and when to do it. And one size does not fit all.
That is such a good point. Such a good point. So here we are trying to I like your idea. Let's reclaim the funeral and maybe we can save the name,
Yeah,
but at least recognizing we can call it lots of other things and talk about it in
sure.
different ways. And one of the keys is kind of what we're doing today. We need to talk about it. We need to have conversations. We need to be educated, and the public needs to be educated so they're not so afraid of this topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one thing I read on your website, I'm asking you all of the things that touched me personally because
Okay.
these are all questions I need to look at. Is that you wrote something about decluttering, the importance of decluttering, and I'm just at this stage in my life of kids are gone from home, trying to figure out what do I do with all this stuff that I have, and so I thought, wow, that's great. I had never thought of decluttering as associated with this topic of talking about end of life decisions and arranging funerals. So I wanted you to
And thank
tell
you.
me
No,
about it.
it's so important. And this actually came from my own personal experience as well, and something that I see with families all the time. Um, for many, many of us, we don't drop dead, right? There is this period of change and transition, and a lot of things happen in our lives, these big transitions, downsizing, maybe moving into independent living, maybe not having that as an option, maybe being placed into a care home environment or things like that, and then dying, right? So there's for a lot of us, there's things that happen before dying, luckily. And when we do go through those transitions, often one of the big things is this downsizing, right? And again, you know how much I hate checklists. Again, people often say, well, it's just a very practical exercise and I need to know, where to donate my pillows. Nobody will take pillows because of bed bug. Okay, that's actually not what you need to do. What you need to do is, again, the heart work, the hard work of the heart work, so that you can understand your values, what is going on for you, why it might be difficult for you to downsize or declutter, what your roadblocks are, and who also might be standing in the way. Many of us who are partnered might have one person in that partnership who is very loath to let us into their garage, for example. And so that I have kind of created this curriculum, if you will. I call it a challenge, but it's a 7-day, day by day process of looking internally and doing some of this hard heart work. And while you're doing it, you also get rid of things, and figure out a bit of a plan and a course of action. Almost everything that I do is this sort of head and heart idea. We really can't tackle well, you can when you need to. When something has happened and mom is being placed in a home and we have 72 hours to get this place on the market, or it's a rental and we have to be out by this date or what have you. Yeah, you can do things quickly, but you know what that is going to be? That's going to be rolling up a wheelbarrow or backing up a 1 ton and loading it and taking things to the dump. There is no dignity in that, and there is no autonomy in that. If we are willing, if we are brave enough to make our own decisions and look at our stopping points, then we can have enormous dignity through these transitions and through these processes, and we can have ultimate autonomy. And it really, decluttering is truly a part of death preparedness. In Swedish, they have this word dödsstanding, which is städning, which is death cleaning. And in the Japanese idea of that Marie Kondo made so bright a few years ago of sparking joy as you declutter, looking at the things that bring you joy and keeping them. This idea of simplicity, it's a natural thing, but because we are so distanced from death and dying, we have compartmentalized everything and we don't allow ourselves to fall into these very natural life explorations. Death exploration is truly just life exploration.
Mhm. Oh, that's such a good point. And I ask because again, with my own mom, she was a person who kept everything. She kept every greeting card she'd ever received, which I
Oh,
discovered after she died. She
yep.
had a room full of bags of greeting cards. And I'm the person who had 1 week to go through all of her stuff. And it was overwhelming to do that job. And as you said, a lot of things went to the landfill that maybe could have been better placed if there'd been more time, but also she might have known who would like this, who would want
Yes.
that, where could we send things had she had the opportunity to do that before she died. And that makes me really want to take charge.
Do that.
I
Yeah.
gathered these material things for some reason around me because they have meaning to me. They're not going to mean that much to other people necessarily unless I pick out the people that they should go to, or where should I donate this, or where should I send it off, and how
And
do
to do
I
this while
release
you
it?
have clarity. And yeah, no, that's exactly it. And I think too, the idea that I really try and hammer home is that we we don't we tend to focus on what we give up when we're starting a decluttering process. Oh, I have to get rid of these things. What if we flipped that upside down and said, what am I going to gain by doing
Mm.
this work? And you are going to gain dignity and autonomy, and you're going to gain a sense of, well, most of us live by this, it's better to give than receive, right? And my goodness, you can have so much giving when you go through this process. And it's also when you're intentional about it. I can't remember if this is day 3 or day 4, but you get to pick what you are not on any God's green acre ever going to give up. I have this absolutely, I've got a background, so it might be hard to see. I have this absolutely ridiculous little thing that my daughter gave me, and it says, "A mother's work is never done." And she was a like a old teenager or young, very young adult when she gave that to me, and she knows my sense of humor, and she knows that I would think that is utterly ridiculous and fabulous. And this sits on my desk, and I honestly, it might go in my casket with me. Like that's how much I love it. And
Mhm.
this is not indicative of my sense of style. Hopefully, my glasses are more indicative of my sense of style. But this is not what is all over my home, and yet I wouldn't ever want to give that up. And being
Wow.
intentional about that is so great.
Yes. And I love that. I love that idea of flipping the question to, what is it that I get that I really want to keep that really matters to me? That seems actually like a good flipping for all of these choices and decisions, is to focus on what do I want to have happen, instead of worrying about what
What
I
might happen?
dread or what
Yeah.
might happen, but what of all these things, what would I like and what do I want? That's a really positive approach to this decision making.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You've just inspired me for
Yay!
some new energy. I have a lot of work to do because I'm confessing it all here. A lot
Well,
of
I'm
plans
here
to
every
make,
step of the way, my
a
darling.
lot of decluttering I have to get done. But I think we've kind of been talking about this, the obstacles that you've seen people have in completing their end of life planning work. Because it seems like we have to address those obstacles as to the best we can.
Yeah. Yeah, I would absolutely agree. This thinking through our stopping points will actually help us start and finish, you know, and finish.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. When we look at, why do I not want to make these choices? Why do I not want to think about this? uh, that can help us find the inspiration, perhaps, to turn
Yes.
it around and
Yes.
make it into a positive experience.
Yeah.
And another thing that that you and I discussed is talking about those life transitions that we go through, and including frailty and dementia, because life doesn't always take the course that we hope or wish that it would. And how can we be prepared for those situations as well?
And it's funny, is it somebody right in the name of her company, Death's Apprentice? Maybe it should have been Life's Apprentice, but this is so important to me, this idea of planning for transitions that may not be inevitable. Death is inevitable, but these other transitions may occur. And when we're willing to go deeper, like actually in my prep school work, we spend a couple of weeks on the medical and philosophical decision making piece. And most advanced care planners and all kind of corporate or provincial or state-led advanced care planning is all very focused on your final moments, right? And you know what? Here's this unbelievable thing for a death doula to say, it's going to happen anyway. Whether you've planned for it or not, it is, and there is nothing you can do about it. Really, this whole idea of being able to architect your own death and da da da. I mean, with the exception of medically assisted dying and whatnot, which is its own set of transitions and decisions and things like that. Our bodies are going to take care of this, right? So, but the other work that none of these programs ever address, it seems to me, is what about either life altering, but not life ending
Mhm.
illnesses? What about things like dementias that whatever they could be, Alzheimer's or vascular dementia or Lewy body or any of these things that are going to be truly life altering? What kind of treatment, what kind of care do we want in place at that point in our lives? What about frailty? Thinking ahead, I have a great regard for a beautiful young female-owned company up here called Capella Designs, and they look at the design element of making a home livable as you age, that doesn't look like a hospital, or
Mhm.
that doesn't look like a care home. And so I feel that there are so many opportunities to think about the care that you want when you're not going to die. Because goodness, we're not going to die, most of us, for a long time, and a bunch of things might happen first.
Mm.
And this is worth thinking through.
That is so true and so very important, because and honestly, I don't see very many people talking about that, the natural progression of aging or of chronic illness, and being prepared for each stage of that along the way, and what decisions might need to be made, and in advance thinking about what would I like?
Yes.
How would I want it to go if this does happen?
Because it's very infrequently, although it does occur, but it's very infrequently a switch, right? It's usually if it's switch at all, it's a dimmer switch, you know, and there are changes that occur that we can either be afraid of and just not think about or talk about or plan and prepare for, or we could imagine ways of living and ways of being while we are in fact human beings,
Yeah.
alive human beings.
So true. And then, as you said, we're planning for our life. We're planning for how we're
Yeah,
going to live, not focusing so much on how we're going to die, since, as you say, that will take care of itself. That's going to
it will
happen
take
in
care of
its own way.
itself.
We don't even
Nope.
know. But planning what we would like to have happen as we live out our years, that is really positive and really valuable.
Yeah. And weirdly enough, that whole concept of memento mori, that holding the reality, as my friend Rena from Willow End of Life Education says, she says the reality of our mortality. And I love that little phrase, but people who are willing to embrace the fact that they are mortal can actually, this is not rocket science. This is part of what we have all known innately forever. But by being distanced from death and being allowing for it to occur in hospitals and behind closed doors, and having that question to the funeral director be, what do I do now? Instead of saying, hey, my person has died, I know what's going to happen now and I need your help. That's a different sentence, isn't it?
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Well, I appreciated in your story that you went from the corporate world to becoming an apprentice in your
Yeah.
training, but the name apprentice is still in the name of your business. So are you always an apprentice? Should we all recognize we need to always be an apprentice to death?
Yeah. I think that um embracing there were some humbling moments, let me tell you, but embracing the beginner's mindset was enormously helpful in my own transition into this field and this realm. And by having the name apprentice right in the title, I can actually be like, oh, still learning, you can't expect me to know that, there's a nice little thing that you can hide behind too, and I actually decided to call my company that because I'm not gonna lie, there was a period of adjustment for me where I was embarrassed. I was worried about that. Oh, so what do you do for a living, cocktail party kind of talk, and having to say to people, I'm a funeral director apprentice for 2 whole years. And then I thought, actually, I'm learning more than I learned during my graduate degree at a major Canadian university right now, and I am learning more than I've learned on many days on the job in my big fancy corporate corner office.
Mm,
So yes, I say I'm learning from life's greatest teacher, which happens to be death.
mm. I love that. And I like that. It's the ultimate disclaimer I'm still an apprentice.
That's right.
But that is the truth of how life is. There's always something new to learn. And
Yeah.
we just have to stay humble enough to admit that.
We sure do. And I'm not always there, but it reminds me every day.
Yeah, I really like that. Well, are there other services that you offer? Because I noticed I just tell us what you do offer for people who visit your website.
Absolutely. So I do a lot of group programming, and I also offer one-to-one work that essentially I often get. I have a family coming this early next week that there's several adult siblings, and they want a few hours of my time to help guide them through some conversations and questions that they have. So I do that kind of work as well, although less and less often. More of the time, you can find me speaking in public places. You can invite me to speak at your organization about these topics, and you can take any of my classes. I have some ones that like the decluttering challenge that's completely asynchronous on your own time, whenever you want to over a period of 7 days, but still with a connection to me and my work. Or you can come to classes that are online, virtual, so that we could be. I've had students from Brazil and the UK and Japan as well, although typically they tend to be from North America. Yeah.
That's really wonderful. And you're a delightful speaker, so you would be an asset to any program, anyone who wanted to. I think, I mean, I love the idea because you can speak to the funeral industry, speak to being an end of life doula, and bring those together. And so your teaching and your wisdom are really valuable.
Thank you. That is so sweet of you to say. I also, it's important to me to keep things very accessible, and we live in this capitalist hellscape. So I do charge for my services, but I do almost all of my kind of public-facing education on Instagram. I have different series that run through like different months. So this month we're doing unexpected death, and the little series is called Your Daily Dose of Death Education, and it costs nothing to follow me on Instagram, deathapprentice.ca. I also have a newsletter that goes out every week that will kind of round up things that I've found, or stuff that I'm doing, or stuff that my colleagues in this realm are doing. And that's super easy to find. You just go to my website, deathapprentice.ca/newsletter, and you can sign up for that too and kind of stay connected. It's never written by AI, and it's a little chatty. It's probably a little longer than most people care for, but I get so many really warm and beautiful replies because I am asking about what's going on for you. So that's
Mm.
a really beautiful thing too, to stay connected.
Well, that's really wonderful. I'll remind everyone I'm talking with Christa Ovenell, but you need to remember deathsapprentice.ca to go to the website and Instagram to connect with Christa, which I think is really valuable because you truly do merge the head and heart. It's just obvious in your energy and everything that you say, and it's very powerful, and you have a lot of wisdom to share with all of us. I want to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. It was just such an honor, Karen.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to. I'll probably be contacting you with my needing help for decluttering. So,
Well, good. Good. I look forward to that.
take care.
Thanks a million.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Christa Ovenell of deathsapprentice.ca, and that you'll check out her work and her website, and also do your own planning around the end of life if you haven't started that yet. So be sure and recommend this episode to other people who might benefit from listening. And I'll be back next time with another interview for you. So until then, take care and goodbye.